I'm going to talk to you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, virtual audience. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. I love doing what I call little historicons. We have actually done very big ones in the past, but it's one of my very favorite subjects. So today we have medieval. We're in 14th century Croatia. And I would like to say that the Morrisons actually traveled to the destinations they're writing about, which lends extra authenticity. I, too, have been to Croatia, so I was able to double-check them and see how it all went.
Did we get everything right?
I have yet to go to India, and they tell me at the Mayo Clinic that persons my age are probably not safe to go to India because our immune systems, when you're almost 85, are just not robust enough to fight off whatever it is. My husband, however, who's younger than I am, is ignoring that. So who knows? You may hear from me one of these days somewhere in India. But we are jumping, gosh, how many centuries? Let's see, from 1921 to
1351.
So almost 600 years. Yeah. So let's talk to the Morrisons and find out, for those of you who don't know their series, we're only at book 3, so we have an opportunity here to go back and talk about the Lawless Land. So how did you two, I know your brother and sister, that part seems obvious, yes, but how did you decide to write together? I know the story, but they may not.
So when I had written 6 books with Clive Cussler in the Oregon Files series, and I wanted to start writing my own books again, and I was thinking of different genres in the thriller world that I could write in. One was historical thrillers, and I thought I knew a lot about World War II, but that was a pretty bloated market back then, and it still is, yeah. And so I said to my wife, I'm thinking of writing a historical thriller. And she said, well, you've got a built-in co-author if you want to do that. And I said, oh, really? Who? And so she said, your sister, who is the head curator of medieval manuscripts at the Getty Museum and is a world expert on the Middle Ages. And I said, that's a great idea. And so I called her up and said, would you like to write a book with me?
Yes. I said yes immediately. I had often been involved in Boyd's books in early drafts. I loved plotting with him, but it never occurred to me that I could actually be a fiction author. I had written many nonfiction books in my role as a medieval art historian, but it's been so fun to go into the fiction world because if I can't find the answer to something, we just get to make it up. And I don't have the opportunity to do that with my nonfiction books.
No, they'd probably frown on that at the Getty.
They do, but you also don't need footnotes. You don't need image rights. It's actually really, really fun.
Right. Provenance out the window. Doesn't really matter. I wanted them to tell you that because oftentimes people think historical fiction might be a little stuffy or a little slow or something, but basically what they're writing is Clive Cussler, as if Clive, had dived back into the 14th century. So they have the pace of a thriller, but they have the scholarship that Beth provides. And so you can learn from them while you're having an absolute wonderful time. So the Lawless Land, we actually sort of collaborated on that one, didn't we?
Yeah, Barbara was nice enough to be one of our beta readers for that and gave us some good feedback that we corrected in the storyline. About how to address some characters and some things about medieval England. So that was very helpful. So thank you very much.
Welcome. But my big contribution was saving Willa.
Yes.
Willa would not be in book 2 or book 3.
Right.
Barbara hadn't said, wait, you're leaving her in the convent? What do you think?
Right, yeah. Yeah, we got to the end of the book, and one of the quotes that we've gotten is from Lee Child, who was nice enough to read it, and he said, Gerard Fox could be Jack Reacher 650 years ago, which was great to hear. And we, when we were writing the book, because the Jack Reacher books, Lee Child has often said, is based on the trope of the knight errant who wanders around and helps people and solves their problem and moves on, and which is something that goes back to the Middle Ages. And so we just thought we'd go back to the medieval times and write that in the actual Middle Ages. And so that's how we came up with Gerard Fox. And you want to talk about how we...
Yeah, so one of the things that's been really fun about writing this series together is that we have the male and the female perspective. And so when we were writing the first book, Willa was such a great character because she was sort of coming out of her shell and becoming the woman who was really sort of like this, action heroine. And we were going to leave her behind after the first book. And
like Reacher, as a
yeah,
different woman
Reacher.
in the
Yeah,
book.
yeah. He goes off and finds out some other law enforcement, and this would be maybe the daughter of the local sheriff or something. But so we were going to leave her behind, and we had actually talked about not leaving her behind. And Boyd was like, "Well, I don't know how we would make that work. I don't know how we could sustain her role throughout the series." And he's sort of the expert. But then another expert came along and said, "No, don't leave her behind. Take her with." And it has been really, I think, awesome to bring her with us because I think they really, as they discover through the novels themselves, they are stronger together as a couple than either of them were separately.
Keep that in mind for Erica Ruth. But let me go back and say one more thing. One of the propelling things in this series is the fact that Fox is an excommunicated British knight, British nobleman, and why? What was the effect of being excommunicated? I mean, for us today, that doesn't seem like a really big deal, but in point of fact, it totally was for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for us to imagine now how central the Christian religion was to almost every single aspect of life in the Middle Ages. They told time according to the Christian. They didn't say it's 10 o'clock. They said, it's an hour before prime or whatever. And so every single aspect of life was governed by the church. So when you were excommunicated, it wasn't just like, oh, I guess I can't go to, the church on Sunday. I'll mow the lawn instead or something. It actually impacted every single aspect because you could not participate in the church life, but also much of your social life was cut off because your own family in many cases was not even allowed to speak with you. It was like shunning almost. And you were outside, ostracized from society. You couldn't participate in commerce. You couldn't participate in social life, and you couldn't participate in religious life. And of course, you were, they really, really believed you were going to hell. So it really was a devastating aspect. And that was one of the reasons that we thought it was such a good idea to have our main character be that.
Yeah, it gave us a good reason to have him traveling around Europe because he and now Willa are searching for justice because he was excommunicated unfairly, and he is searching for a way to get back into the good graces so he can have his life back. But while he's traveling with Willa, they come across people who are even in more desperate straits. And because there was no social media to say, okay, this guy is now excommunicated, they could keep that facade wherever they go of not being shunned. But if they ever go back to where people know them, they would not be able to have a life.
And his lands.
And his lands are gone. His title is gone. His reputation is nothing. And so they're on a quest throughout the series to get those back.
And theoretically, they can't get married, right?
Theoretically, no, but they might just get married anyway.
Or just ignore it. I mean, who would know, right? If they're traveling around. Okay, Erica Ruth, let's talk about the pairing, because when we started out with Murder at the Mina House, which I have to say I love because I've actually stayed there and it's such a cool place. Although it was cooler when you wrote about it. It hadn't been taken over by the Marriott chain.
Yeah.
Which just kind of wiped out much of the authenticity.
It really did.
I know. Also, there's a palace of, was it Farouk? And the Salt had a palace adjacent. We're in Giza, so we're sort of on the platform. And now I guess you can go through it. But then it was a really active palace with servants and horses and the whole bit. So it was more exciting when she was there.
It was. Also, it was more exciting because the hotel itself, when I set the book, was set completely out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it was just the hotel and the pyramids. And now Giza has completely enveloped. It's like you can eat dinner right across from the pyramids.
Actually, you have to be really clever not to get McDonald's in your photos.
It's very true.
Of the Sphinx. I mean, really, it's hard.
Yeah.
Everything has grown up around it. And now the Grand Egyptian Museum, which is around the corner, is going to bring even more tourist traffic and whatever. Have they moved the boat there? Because one of the cool things about the pyramid, which I don't remember comes into your book, is remember did you go and visit it? The
Yes.
gorgeous boat.
Yes, I visited the old museum, but I would actually love to go back and see the new museum that they've erected.
Me too. But my question was the
I don't
boat museum is by the big pyramid.
I did
but I'm
not see the boat
thinking-
museum.
Okay.
I think they must have moved it though,
They
right?
probably did.
Yeah.
Indoors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
so tell us about
So India.
well, no, but start at the beginning for anybody who doesn't know it.
Oh,
How did your
Yes.
Jane meet Revers?
so Jane is my protagonist. She is a widow of the First World War. She is not sad about it. She
Very delicately
very,
put.
very
right?
delicately put.
She's actually rah.
Yeah. So she's traveling to Egypt with her Aunt Millie, who likes to stir the pot, I think is a polite way to put that. And runs into a young flapper who they disagree with one another in the bar, and then the flapper winds up dead. Jane gets accused of the murder, and she needs to clear her name. So she starts poking in, learning everybody's secrets in the hotel. This is what I also loved about the Mina house. It was very convenient for having all of my suspects stuck right in one place, with not a lot of options to get out. And so she met Redvers in the bar. He told her that he was a banker. She knew that was obviously a lie. And I think pretty quickly you realize that he is an agent for the British Crown. And so in that first novel they meet. In the second one they kind of pick back up, and then from then on they sort of are working together.
So they've gone on to England. They've been on a ship to Istanbul.
Yep.
They've been to Scotland.
Scotland, there was a transatlantic cruise in there somewhere.
Wasn't that sort of on the way to
Yep,
Istanbul?
yep,
Right.
yep.
And now,
And now we're in India.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is a very interesting place in India. How do you even
Yes.
pronounce it?
Uttarakhand. It is so the India was colonized by Britain, or it was and so during the time the India's really hot, you guys. It's so hot. It was so hot when I was there. This is very much what I tried to wear, just loose clothes linen, so breathed. And so it was so hot that the British government had set up on like the plains, and so they would decamp when it got too warm up to the hills where it was much cooler. So that's where this takes place, up in the hills at a hill station, they called it, where the British government would have come up and like just camped out for the summer when it was too hot for them to be on the plains.
Is it in Kashmir? I
Oh
think it
man,
might be.
I think it is.
Anybody who read MMK, probably you're all too young to have read MMK, but I know. Thank you for shaking your head. She was British, and she wrote marvelous sort of Mary Stuart kinds of novels in exotic places like Madagascar. But anyway, she loved Kashmir, and so she wrote one of her books there. And there's lots of lakes and water, and I mean,
It's really beautiful.
And so I wondered when I was reading your book, but is it a real place? I should have looked it up.
It is a real place.
Oh, okay.
It is a real place.
All right.
Yeah,
So
it's very beautiful.
Britain under the Raj, but in the 1920s, Gandhi has already begun to.
He's begun to foment some dissent.
Yeah.
So basically, Redvers is there to try to work with, basically a liaison, because they're about to send a British delegation over to kind of decide whether they're going to let the Indian people make some of their own laws. And so Jane meets a woman who is a British citizen, but she was, and this is based on a real woman. She was a British citizen, but she became a member of the Indian Senate, basically. I know, that face. And she was no longer very involved in politics there, and so Jane runs into her, and then the woman mysteriously dies. The government is claiming that it was a tiger attack. There were tigers. When I was in India, I think the thing that was most startling to me, like we went on a safari trying to see tigers in the wild, and this really stuck with me, which is why there's a tiger in this book, and why someone supposedly is killed by one. We didn't see a tiger on the safaris, and we came back, and a man working at the desk was like, "Oh, did you see a tiger?" We were like, "No." The other tour guide, of course, saw one. We did not. And we were just like, "Have you seen tigers?" He's like, "Oh, yes, many times." And we were like, "Oh, in the park?" And he was like, "One time in the park." And we were like, "Where else have you seen the tiger?" And he was like, "Oh, on the way to and from work." And I was like, just living your life, riding your moped to and from work, knowing that like a tiger is just wandering by, has really stuck with me.
Well, there are a lot fewer tigers than there used
There
to
are.
be,
There are.
tragically. But
Yes.
yeah, I can see your point. So you have an opportunity to do a kind of locked room mystery once again, right? Because
Yes.
back to the Mina House design.
Yep.
Agatha Christie lives.
Yeah.
So what happens?
Well, I mean, she has to. So this time it's a lot more political. So she's digging into secrets in like the governor's mansion in Utkamand, or they call it Uti. And she's there's a tea plantation. There's some folks out there. I don't want to give away too much, but like she's digging into secrets again, which is one of my favorite things. Is uncovering people's secrets, because everyone has secrets.
So while Rivers is being a secret agent, Jane
Yes.
is actually being a private investigator, which I love. So back to you guys. You have an absolutely wonderful opening scene in this book, which is pure Clive Cussler, I thought, because what happens? Tell us about it. It's
well,
a maritime moment for
yeah,
sure.
it's a maritime battle that starts off the story, but there's a reason that we include Marco Polo as the main character in that.
So as Barbara said, and it sounds like Erica travels for her books too, we actually went to Croatia when we were doing research for this book. And one of the places that we went was an island called Korčula that has a walled town on it. Looks like maybe some people have been to Korčula. It's fabulous, isn't it? And when we were there, we were sort of surprised to learn that they have a museum there called the Marco Polo House. And Korčula Island claims that Marco Polo was actually born on this island in Croatia and later moved to Venice. Most scholars don't actually agree with that. Most scholars are pretty sure he was born in Venice. But there is a possibility that he was captured off the coast of Korčula in a battle with Venice's rival, Genoa. And so we were like, well, we got to use this somehow. So we decided to incorporate Marco Polo into the story. And my day job, when I'm not writing novels with Boyd, is as senior curator of manuscripts at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. And so I always like to try to slip a manuscript into the story if I can. And so we invented this sort of opening scene where Marco Polo is in this battle on the sea. There's a trebuchet, which is like lobbing stones at the other ship. Marco Polo's ship sinks. He was actually captured as a prisoner. And for those of you who don't know the story of Marco Polo, the reason we have what is called the Book of Marvels, which is his account of his travels to China and to the East, is because after he was captured as a prisoner, he was thrown in jail in Genoa, and he actually related his adventures to a fellow prisoner who wrote them up, and that's why we have his book. But Boyd and I decided to alter history in a little way.
Well, we don't know.
We don't know. It's possible. It is possible that Marco Polo actually had kept a journal while he was traveling. And of course, we don't have it now. So maybe he did. And so what we do in our novels is we want to have them have a historical basis, but we don't change history as we know it. So as you'll find out at the end of the novel, there's a reason that we still don't have Marco Polo's journals. And so that was really the basis of including him in the first part of the story. He's such a great figure, and because our characters travel around and see all of these amazing things, it seemed really cool to include Marco Polo, who did basically the same.
Absolutely. So that's really more or less a prologue. But then your opening action scene, you're back having another maritime adventure.
Yes, yeah. So it takes off almost directly from the end of The Last True Templar, which is the second book in the series, and they are on a ship going to Dubrovnik in Croatia, and they meet this couple who seem to be in trouble, but they won't reveal to these strangers from England what their trouble is. But then a accident on board the ship causes the wife of the couple to fall into the water, and Gerard Fox jumps in to save her, and there's a big action scene as they try to save her lives. And I'll spoil it that she doesn't die, and because he saves her, they begin to trust Fox and Willa and reveal that their child has been kidnapped by a minister of Dubrovnik who is in league with a Serbian Empire warlord. And if they don't betray their town, which is very valuable, their child will be killed. And so Fox and Willa come up with a plan to try to help them get their child back and get embroiled in this huge adventure because of that.
So your basic hostage situation, right?
Right.
Right, but I thought it was interesting the way you laid out the governance of Dubrovnik. And, I don't know that I'd ever actually thought about the Serbian Empire until this book came along. But I think it's important to remember for the time that you're talking about that the trade between Europe and Asia and so forth, it all went through Constantinople and Venice. Nobody had yet sailed west and gone down around Africa. So Venice was an enormous commercial and maritime power because the Silk Road came through and it traded back and forth. Constantinople, the Red Sea, and so forth. And then when that rascal Vasco da Gama took off and sailed down, it changed everything because then shipping and commerce started moving west to the Atlantic. And Venice gradually, became impoverished and sort of sank into senescence as we see it today. But it was a huge maritime power and all over the Eastern Mediterranean. Rhodes, Croatia, all of those, they were part of the Venetian Empire.
Dubrovnik at that time was part of the Venetian Empire. It was an incredibly important, as you said, trading post along that sort of trade route, the Silk Road going towards Venice. And one of the major producers for Dubrovnik at that time was the salt trade. And I think now we think, oh, you can buy a thing of Morton salt for like 39 cents. Well, maybe more now. But in any case, you can buy salt for pretty cheap because it's actually commercially produced now. But in the Middle Ages, there were really only two ways to get salt, which was to mine it in salt mines or through evaporation in salt pans near coastal areas. And so the most valuable town along the Adriatic coast at this time, just north of Dubrovnik, was a little town called Ston, which is the town that Boyd mentioned was being sort of ransomed at this point with the hostage of this couple's child. And salt provided huge income for Dubrovnik, and this little town Ston had gone back and forth between the Hungarian Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Venetian Republic, the Serbians. So it had gone through all of these things because everyone wanted this little town because of the salt trade. And I think now we think, oh, I've got too much salt in my diet, I need to get it out. But at that time, it was a problem, get enough salt, because we actually need salt to live, and it was a preservative for any kinds of foods like meats. That's why there's so much salt in canned soup and whatnot. So they really needed the salt. And for those of you who don't happen to know medieval Latin, you can see how valuable salt was because they actually used to pay Roman soldiers salt as their payment for their service. And that's where we get the word salary. So that, that the paycheck I get from the Getty every 2 weeks is based on salt. I don't get salt. I'd rather have the money.
Kidding. So this reminds me to ask you, how do you solve the language problem? I mean, he's from Britain. They've traveled through France. Mont Saint-Michel, you did that really well. Now you've gone to Italy. Now you're in Croatia, and you're going to Spain in book 4. Spoiler, Yep. They all live through this. And so how is it that they're talking to each other? Is Latin the common language here?
No. What we did was, well, first of all, we had them both be fluent in English and French because, especially in the nobility, all the nobles in England knew French as well. But we also decided to make them kind of polymaths at languages and could learn them really quickly. And that's partly based on people both Beth and I know. I have a friend who's a tour guide for Rick Steves, and he knows about 15 languages. And he can, pick up the Czech language in 2 months. And it's pretty amazing. But he can go through all of the Balkans and speak Croatian and Serbian and Slovenian and Czech. And so we just decided Fox and Willa happen to be just really good at languages. And so they learned Italian, which, they're most of the languages they're learning are are Romance languages, so they have something in
Croatia
common.
doesn't, but yeah.
Yeah, they don't speak Croatian.
So at that time, because the Adriatic coast was part of the Venetian Empire, most people actually spoke Italian as well. So they learned Italian in the second book, and then they use that Italian in the third book in Croatia. And then Italian, for those of you who both know Italian and Spanish, they're really not that far apart. So the next book starts a few months later, and so they're going to know Spanish. But one of the things is we had long conversations about this. Boyd and I did. And so one of the things that was really fun is in the second book, because they were just learning Italian, that became one of the plot points because they overhear something and they completely misinterpret it because they don't know Italian very well. So that actually plays a role in the book, which is fun.
Oh, you guys both speak English, and you have largely sent them to places where people speak English, right?
Yes.
Because Egypt was a protectorate.
Yep.
Constantinople would have been kind of the outlier there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, Jane strictly speaks English. I think Redverse speaks a little bit of other languages, but he's not, like,
But
fluent in
it's
anything.
not a real consideration.
It
in
hasn't
your
been
books.
a real consideration, and I've really tried to send them places so far. And in the next, we're actually going to Venice next. I know, but yeah, I've sent them most of the places where like it would make sense to send Redverse because of his work for the Crown, and so it makes sense also that there's already going to be a lot of English speaking where they are and what they're doing.
So are you creeping along in time? Because if you
I'm
go
creeping
too
very
very
slowly.
slowly, if you get to the 1930s, the world's really going to change.
Yeah, it's going to be a really big difference. So I have on purpose kept them all pretty close together.
That's one of the great things about historical fiction. They're already, dead, so you can just creep along. There's actually some great, like Lindsay Davis, I remember started the second book after The Silver Pigs like an hour later. The Silver Pigs ends, and she picked it right up again. Why not? I
Well,
mean, it's
yeah,
just-
White Fortress takes place about 3 days after The Last True Templar ends.
But I mean, I think you don't have to have a suspension of disbelief when you're reading historical fiction. Like we have this conversation with Michael Connelly all the time, and Ian Rankin, people who made decisions to age their characters in real time and then have aged them out. So we're not. I mean, Harry is like done. And I hope he isn't going to die of cancer in the new book. But there we are. Right, we talked about that Tuesday when Michael was here. People were actually anxiously saying to him, "Is Harry going to die of cancer?" Michael wouldn't answer. But that's why we're getting Ballard, and that's why because he made that decision to write it in real time. But you don't have to face that, right?
No, yeah, we're starting we're in the middle of book 4, and I think we're just to 1352, and all 3 of the
You're doing
previous
well.
books take place in 1351.
So, since Romantasy has brought 6 to the fore in much of what we're reading, a key question I think for a couple like this, is how are they keeping Willa from getting pregnant? Notice who's answering the question.
Exactly. We surprisingly have discussed this at length.
I'm not surprised at all. I think
Because
you have to.
we've really got to figure it out. We haven't made any final decisions yet, but the reality is that to travel around Europe this time period with a baby is, impossible. So we do have to address it at some point, and the way we've addressed it so far is by having the next book start really, really close to when they got married, so that it's feasible that she's not pregnant yet. But I think we did agree that in the next book we're going to have to think about it more carefully, because this one I think we're like we can make it one more book without.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to start thinking about it because they just get married at the end of book 2, and so book 3 they're just starting to be a couple as a married couple, and of course they were all both chaste before they got married. So the 4th book is still only a few months after they've been married, so it's plausible that they haven't got she hasn't gotten
If
pregnant,
you're
or she wouldn't
bucketing
know.
around on horses and coaches and all, women had miscarriages fairly often. So, and there were people who were sterile, incompatible couples, and all. So it's not necessarily the case that that she would be pregnant. But I just thought it was something you're going to have to deal with at some point.
She's probably not going to have 7 children.
No, right. There was more advanced birth control in the 1920s.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for that because Jane's not going to have children.
Not at all. No. Well, she had such a hard first marriage.
She did. She had such a difficult first marriage that, yeah, she decided against it. So, and I feel good about that decision.
All right. So where are we going after India?
So after India, we are moving to Venice. It will be called Vengeance in Venice. I'm going there next month to
Poor
do
you.
research. It's really hard. It's very difficult. And then after that, I don't know. I was thinking maybe Spain for book 8. Yeah, but
Spain's wonderful.
number 8 is still up for grabs.
Okay.
country-wise.
And you guys are definitely going to Spain, as anyone can tell from following you on Instagram.
Yes. Yeah. We last October we went to southern Spain. Went to Seville, Cordoba, Granada, Malaga, and it's a really interesting time period for our book because part of Spain was still controlled by the Muslim Caliphate. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the very southern part of Spain in our next book was still under the control of the Emirate of Granada. And so we're actually going to have they're going to travel in both the Christian lands and the Islamic lands, which has entailed a lot more research on my part because I studied Christian Europe in the Middle Ages. So it's been really fun to try to figure out, and we had a great time looking at the differences in architecture, food, costume, customs, laws, all these kinds of things will take a really central role. And part of what we do is we kind of plan where they're going to go in the novel, and then we actually travel that same route. And then we haven't started writing yet, so we have plenty of space to get new ideas, which we always do. And so one of my favorite stories about this past one, the one that is just out in Croatia, was on the last day of our trip. We took a side trip to Kotor in Montenegro, which is this incredible medieval town right on the bay. Beautiful blue water set really far back, and we had this really long drive. I got a little car sick. But in any case, we got there, and it's a walled town, tiny little town at the bottom, and posed really, really high up above the town is this amazing fortress, and it is 1,339 steps from the bottom up to the fortress. And so, of course, we're like, yeah, we're going to go. Well, Boyd and his wife, Randy, who comes with us on all these trips, they're both in excellent shape. And so after the first 10 minutes, I'm like, go, just leave me to die. I'll get up to the top eventually. So they did. They scampered off. And so I get to the top about 20 minutes after they do, and they're fresh as daisies, not a drop of sweat, and they're looking out over the thing. And I come up, and I'm like, and Boyd, he turns to me and he goes, "We've got to throw someone off." And I'm like, "Do you mean me?" But no, he meant one of our characters. So when you read that in the book, you can envision us at the top of that. And then they very nicely waited till I had my breath back to when we went back down the 1,339 steps.
So the way you're traveling, are they going to circle back from Spain? You going to try Portugal next? Because Portugal's kind of one of my favorite places.
We'd love to do Portugal. We've talked about a lot of different places we'd love to go in Europe, to the Holy Roman Empire, Carcassonne, the Holy Land, Flanders. So there's what's great about making them a knight errant couple is that we can just have them go anywhere. And they have horses, and they can.
You can. Now, you just barely skipped past the Black Death. I mean, 1351. You're only like 3 years out. So
yeah, and that impacts all of the stories. And when we started writing the book, it was about 2018 when we came up with the idea, and then we went to Europe in 2019 to research it, and we had decided on setting it just a few years after the worst of the Black Death because it was such a pivotal era in human history, because it was really the beginning of the end of the feudal era in Europe. And it also gives us an excuse when we're plotting. We're like, well, do they have any kids? Yeah, they all died in the plague. So okay. So when 2020 happened, we were most of the way through writing the book, but we incorporated what we learned about the pandemic, going through it ourselves, and realizing that there really wasn't much difference in how we dealt with the pandemic today than they did 670 years ago, because they saw this disease coming, and all they could do was hole up in their houses and hope they didn't get it from somebody they knew. And actually, the word quarantine comes from the Black Death, because ships that would come into Italian ports would be made to stay at anchor for 40 days to try to keep the plague from coming from these ships. And in Italian, the word for 40 is quaranta. So that's how we get the term quarantine.
If only they'd known about the rats.
Yeah.
I know, it's really too bad. If you're going to Venice, when you see
I
the,
am.
you know, the masks with the long noses,
Yes.
which is so Venetian, that was from the plague, because they thought that if they could stuff oranges and herbs and stuff inside that long, the plague doctor guys.
Yeah.
And so that's still part of Venetian culture.
Yeah, I'm excited.
You gonna wear one yourself?
I'm not ruling it out.
Okay, there we go. All right, so we all know where they've been and where they're going. How about questions from any of you? What would you like to ask?
Are we ever going to learn what government agency Redford's works for? We're just always going to have that in mystery.
I think we'll probably learn at some point.
I think it's probably a shadow agency, you know. The British were really good on that. They don't even have a written constitution, so, you know, they have more opportunity to create those. But don't you think, I mean, you know that too, that most of the espionage stories, spy stories and all that circulate around us, they're almost all black ops agents. You know, there's an occasional actual CIA person or something, but most of the time it's like Sigma Force or Numa or whatever, you know. I mean, yeah, you know, why not? Right. Anyone else?
Do you guys get along, or do you have any arguments? Well, you know, I think most of the bruises have healed, haven't they, Boyd?
Yeah, I'm doing okay now.
No, I mean, one of the fun things is Boyd and I are very close in age. We're only about 20 months apart, and we've always been really close. And so this project was actually a dream to have a chance to even have more time with him. He lives in Seattle. I live in LA, so we're in the same time zone, which makes it easier. And it just is really fun. We talk basically twice a day. LA traffic is good for something. So I usually call him on the way to work every day and on the way home every day. And then on the weekends, we go out and walk our dogs and talk plot while we're walking our dogs. And we really haven't had a serious disagreement. I think one of the things
When
that's
I'm late on a deadline.
yeah, I ride Boyd a little bit about that. But I think the thing is that's nice is that we have such a longstanding good relationship that we really trust each other. And so when either one of us says, this just isn't working for me, even if the other person doesn't agree, we're like, okay, scrap it. Let's go back and rework it to make us both comfortable. I think that's been really important for me because I'm not a writer. Boyd does most of the writing. I'm really on the plotting side. So we plot every single chapter about what's happening and what's happening with the characters. And then he goes and writes it. And then he comes back and he's like, and they were wearing clothes. And so then I go in and I describe all the clothes and all that. And then he, you know, massages it. So it's a very iterative process, but I'm not the writer. And so I'm always so grateful for how much he takes my opinion and my ideas into consideration.
Well, Beth has always edited all of my books, and she actually, when I was writing with Clive, Beth saw the book before Clive did and helped me through plotting problems. And I would call her and say, I can't figure this out, and she'd help me through it. And she edits. She's a great editor, and she's a big fan of thriller novels. So she knows what makes for a good story. So when we started working together, she already knew my writing style. She already has she reads everything. And she writes her own books, nonfiction books. So she also is a writer. And so it made it very easy. But yeah, we get that question a lot about, when we tell we're siblings and that we write together. A lot of people ask, "Oh, can you?" Because I could never do that with my sibling. But I think we're the only You would probably know. Are we the only brother-sister writing
At the
team?
moment, yeah.
Because there's Andrew and Lee Child, and there's
Yeah,
Lynn and
but
Val
Lee's
Constantine.
not writing with Andrew anymore. It's all Andrew.
Yeah.
All the time now. Even
Right.
though Lee's name is still on the book. That's why he doesn't come and see us now.
Right.
Because he's not actually writing the readers at this point. Yeah, there have been husbands and wives. There have been neighbors. There was a fabulous couple called Manning Coles that wrote some of my all-time favorite spy novels. You might not have run across them. Oh, Toast to Tomorrow is maybe my very favorite World War II book. And they were neighbors, and they were both, I think, part of the British spy, whatever. And one of them died, and then the other one couldn't go on. And that was true of Dick Francis. It turned out that his wife, Mary, was the writer. Dick was the guy that provided all the, the jockey and the horse. Yeah, but when Mary died, that was like, I know. So that was a collaboration that nobody really knew about until.
Wasn't on the book.
No, never was. So, there may be more collaborations than we actually know. Yes, sir.
Did the Getty have to close down because of the wildfires? I heard something about that.
Yeah, so as a question about the wildfires, the Getty, we did have to close down. In fact, it was terrifying for those of us who know the collections and the space. The interesting thing was, so that day that the fire broke out was out near the Getty Villa, because we actually have two sites. We have the Getty Center and the Getty Villa. And I was at the Getty Center, which is where I work, and all of the senior curators had gone to lunch that day. But we decided to go at 11 o'clock to have our meeting and then have lunch afterwards. So we were in the cafe, and the cafe at the Getty Center has huge windows looking directly south. And we were in the middle of the meeting, and somebody looked out the window and said, "Is that smoke?" And the senior curator of antiquities was like, I better go somewhere else. And so by that night, the fire had just been whipped into a fury. And it was very fortunate for us that the emergency coordinator happened to be at the Getty Villa that day, so they could start calling in. We have our own, I think we have 50,000 gallons of water that we can immediately spread into the ground to help prevent the fire from spreading. And we've done decades of clearing out undergrowth and making sure that there's nothing too close to the building. So it's all very well planned. But the Getty Villa is still closed even now, probably not going to open again until late June. And the reason is, first of all, we didn't have any potable drinking water until last week. Also, the roads to the Getty Villa are still closed to the public. So even if we wanted to open, because we could be open, there's no general public because they're not allowed on the roads. And I was just saying before this that we have to cut down between 900 and 1,100 trees that were burned on the property that could conceivably fall in a building, fall on a visitor, those kinds of things, fall on a road. So we have to get all of that cleared out before we can reopen. So it was terrifying, but it really was a testament to how well prepared the Getty was, because if you look at an aerial view, you can see the Getty Villa, and it's burned for like a square mile, completely around it in a circle.
The artwork is protected from the smoke, right?
And we sealed all of the doors closed as soon as the fire broke out, so that the ash could not get in there to damage the artworks. And they can turn the HVAC system to go the other way, so it's reverse pressure, so that the air is pushing out instead of drawing in.
How about earthquakes?
We hope very much that they won't happen. Actually, it was really interesting because I started working at the Getty in 1996. I'm about to have my 29th anniversary at the Getty. And the first years went by, and then I did a big show in 2019, and we had the biggest earthquake that we've ever had in 2019 after my show went up. And I had a lot of emails the next morning from lenders all over the world asking about the safety of their objects. We have these very cool platforms at the Getty where, in the case of an earthquake, for sculptures that are the things that are most at risk, not the paintings, because those are flat attached to the wall, but for sculptures, especially sculptures in the round, we have these platforms and the sides pop off, and there's actually interlocking platforms that move independently. And you can actually watch a video online during I think they do like a 7.7 earthquake, and the sculpture barely moves at all because these things underneath are taking into account the movement of the earthquake. So we have a lot of technology to make sure that the collections are safe from both earthquakes and
how much of
fires.
it came from New Zealand, because there's a museum in Wellington called Te Papa, which I've been to
Yes.
a couple of times and I'm about to go see again. next year, and they have been like pioneers in museum earthquake protection.
Yeah, the Getty has actually done a lot of work, and now we provide those platforms to museums in
That's
other
great.
areas. In fact, when we get really important loans, we send those platforms back with the loans to places like Italy and Greece that do have earthquake prone areas as well. So it's really
That's
nice.
great. Wow, you really do. Yeah, trying to protect art heritage is a really scary thing. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Erica Ray about the development of your two characters. Because you begin with the woman fairly well developed, and then Redverse just kind of sneaks in. So, would you talk a little bit about that, about how you developed them independently?
Um, sure. I think Jane was much easier for me to write because I am a woman. She just kind of came to me wholesale, and I wanted to keep him a little bit mysterious, which is why I've definitely been parsing out things about him as we go. I wanted to keep him mysterious and intriguing for her, especially, which is so that's why I decided to do it that way.
I didn't think it was clear. Did you at the end of the first book whether Redverse would stick around? I mean, it no. I mean, I thought there was a real chance that he was, done and gone, and some new and attractive
fair.
person might show up later. What are you doing with the aunt? Or
Aunt Millie,
yeah,
she. I mean, I can't.
sidetracked into her own relationship.
She's been
hasn't
sidetracked
she?
into her own relationship. Actually, in the end of this book is there was a Christmas novella that was only. It is printed in the back of this one, so you can have your hands on it, and that one kind of seals things up for Millie. So I can't bring her along on every single adventure, but she will come back. I'm lucky. I was gonna kill her in the first book, and I'm real glad I didn't because people really like Aunt Millie.
See,
Yep, we're lucky.
Hey, we follow your advice.
can't leave those women behind. Is there an online question, PK?
I have a couple for you guys.
Here, you
So
need a- you
one
need-
of the questions. Oh,
Sorry, but you need a mic.
all right. So specifically, actually, this is for you, Barbara. So this is why I'm going to be passing back the microphone to you. So they were curious about with your travels to Castle Braun and whether or not for Boyd and Beth, are they going to? Could we potentially see some Croatians? Are not Croatian but Transylvanian area sort of adventures? And also for you, Barbara, when you were traveling with Lori, did you guys just meet at Castle Braun, or did you do the entire trip together?
We were doing the entire lower Danube from the Black Sea to Budapest as a river cruise, but we started because it started in Romania. It starts in Bucharest, and then it goes down. River boats are not allowed to go into the ocean or into the Black Sea, which kind of counts as an ocean. They're not seaworthy, so they start in Bucharest and sail down to the marshes, for the Danube, and then you go back upriver. But because we were in Bucharest, we took several days and drove up into the Carpathians and went to Castlebron, which is just a joke. I mean, if there was a Vlad the Impaler, he's actually in Budapest. When you're in Budapest, you can go and see him. So Castlebron is a tourist attraction that is actually. There's no Dracula there. There never was a Dracula there. But who was there was Marie, the Queen of Romania. So Laurie was inspired. I found her jewelry in a museum in Bucharest and pointed it out to Laurie. And it was just too good a thing. So that's how Marie of Romania became part of the Mary Russell Sherlock Holmes canon, was that she lived in the castle, not Dracula and not Vlad the Impaler. It's gorgeous country, but the government, as in many communist governments, didn't really never got a real handle on the economy or how to do it. So some of the valleys, as you're going towards the Carpathian, have these long and completely derelict, like manufacturing things, but they built them, but they never figured out how to build anything inside them. So they're just rusting away. And now the problem is they're turning toxic and nobody really knows how to take them all down. So it kind of spoils the agricultural effect, and you see this lousy factory with rust and, broken glass and everything. It was a very odd experience.
For us, I mean, as Boyd said, there are many fabulous places we could go. I don't think we've ever actually specifically discussed Romania. Part of the issue with Bucharest is that in the I think it was the 80s, Ceausescu completely destroyed the medieval downtown of Bucharest.
This 1,000 room palace.
Yes,
yeah.
and I've been through the 1,000 room palace, but there's no medieval town there, and Boyd and I have always thought it was very important to be able to go visit these places. And actually, one of the great things is in all of our books, all the places we described, you can go today and see the buildings that our adventures take place in. The 14th century architecture is still there. I'm sure that there is 14th century castles left in Romania. I don't think that is one of them. I think that it's
and actually
it's
the other
more
ones they
16th
take
century
you to
thing.
are really much more 19th century. I'm
Exactly.
not sure there's
So,
anything really
yeah, I'm not sure
medieval left.
but I had a really good adventure in Romania one time, and I'd love to go back. It was really interesting, but we haven't really discussed that one.
Also, they're wanting to know for all three of you, when and where would you ultimately like to live? So, would you want to live in like Europe in the 1920s if you could? They're very curious about that.
You go ahead. I have no desire to live in the Middle Ages whatsoever.
It wasn't a woman-friendly
It was,
time.
being tall and red-haired and smart, there was really not much place for me in the Middle Ages. So I have no desire to live in the Middle Ages. I am very fortunate and privileged in my job to be able to go to Europe 3 or 4 times a year. And so I get plenty of time there. I'm very happy to live in the United States. I've lived overseas for short amounts of time, like a month or two, and I really enjoyed it. But I think I'm a U.S. girl because I get to travel so much. How about you?
Same. I like plumbing. I like hot showers and a bed with no bugs in them. So yeah, the modern era is perfectly fine with me. But again, I get to go travel to all these fabulous places and imagine what they would be like in different time periods. And we've actually talked about spending a month or two in some of the places we've visited, like Seville in Spain. Unlike the Publishers Weekly in their first review of our first book said, the husband and wife team of Boyd and Beth Morrison. And we wrote to them, no, can you correct that, please? Or Florence, Italy with my wife, and just, be able to soak in the atmosphere for a few months and see what it's like.
I wouldn't want to live during the 20s either. Just, things were moving forward.
Especially with the 30s coming
With
up.
the 30s sneaking right up. If I had to, it would be Paris. I would have loved. There are a lot of people that were, mingling there in the 20s. That would have been fun. But yeah, I think hard pass on the 20s for me as a woman.
It's an interesting exercise. Somebody once suggested to me, let's say you could go back in time for like a year, pick whatever it is, and you could take a trunk. Living today, what would you pack in your trunk to go back? And I think a lot of that would be age dependent too, about, whether you needed glasses, whether you needed sanitary napkins, whether you needed, what, because think of all the things we have now to sort of keep us alive or keep us, doing things that.
I would fill it with antibiotics.
Well, that's a very serious. But I think if you do that, you recognize that going back in time would be horrendous. I just read a book. I can't remember what it is at the moment, but anyway, somebody goes back in time to the Victorian era, and it's a time travel thing, and dressing this woman to be a servant in the Victorian era was so horrendous. Like 11 petticoats, and you had to be laced into it. And basically, you were wearing 40 pounds of clothes, and, and there were very few sanitary facilities, bathrooms and whatever. It was a nightmare. People were dirty. They were, smelly. It was awful. No. And so I think we're very fortunate that, we're in the modern world pretending.
Well, and the funny thing is, to them, they were in the modern world at that time. That they had state of the art technology and this is amazing new saddle for the horse, and so for them, it is the best time probably. Just ask any 20-year-old to go back in time and live without a smartphone, and I can't go back. That would be terrible. Yeah, so one thing we decided in the storyline is that we kind of wanted to make Gerard Fox and Willa people a little out of time. They're very progressive for their time period because we wanted to make them relatable to current readers. I mean, we kind of clean up the Middle Ages a bit. It was a very brutal time and terrible things and terrible living conditions for us, but for them it was just life.
Why they drank all the time. The water was totally unsafe.
Yeah, they drank
You
ale.
know? No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
They really, I mean, the ancient Egyptians were even smart enough. They took all their bread and put it into water so they could drink beer all the time because the Nile water would have killed them. So you have to really think about that. I saw your hand moving.
I'm going to say, if we did go back in time, I want to be able to pick my class or my amount of wealth.
Well, we always think we're going to go back, not on the servant end of the time, but yeah, no, I know. It'll be
worse.
Yeah, really so. Well, thank you all very much for your attention. Thank you, author. Oh, I'm sorry. Was there one more? Sorry, sir.
For either one, as you're developing your characters in a story, do you ever become your character? And if so, how long until it disappears?
That's a great question. I don't become my characters, but I do hear them very clearly. So like Jane, I know who she is. I hear her very clearly when I'm writing. But that does go away once I'm finished. Also, partly because I'm always working on another project. So then my brain flips over and switches to a new thing.
So I just want to tell a short story. So one of the characters in our book is Fox's horse, Zephyr, who becomes sort of like he has a personality and he really plays a role. So this year for Boyd's birthday, I got him a shirt that said, "What would Zephyr do?" So he can think about that. But in terms of me, I haven't really associated myself too much with Willa, but I do find one of the interesting things is that writing this fiction series has actually given me ideas for writing my art history, like my nonfiction works, which was an unexpected result. And so writing these books and thinking about like the decisions they made that then enter the historical record, they were people, they had emotions, they had events happen that changed them. And so after we started writing this book, I think it was actually during the second book, I wrote an article about a famous knight named Anthony of Burgundy. And everybody had always talked about his library in the Middle Ages being like the third largest collection of manuscripts at that time in Europe, and everybody had always listed his library according to where they are now, like, London, British Library, Getty, Museum, blah, blah, blah. And so I reordered it according to his biography, and I started noticing things like when he broke his leg during a tournament. After that, he ordered 5 books because he was bored, because he wasn't able to get out and do his nightly things, and then he was somebody who was not a legitimate son. And once he got the Pope to legitimize him, he changed his coat of arms in all of his manuscripts. So there were these things that he concentrated on at different points in his life because it wasn't a monolithic whole. He changed just like we do. So that was an interesting result for me, that it actually changed how I think about my scholarly research.
You mentioned your book about the dogs because I think that's going to be your bestseller. At dinner last night, this came up, so wind it up with that because I think it's going to be great.
So one of the projects that I want to do at some point, I have so many hats, it's hard to find enough hours in the day to do everything I want to do, but sort of combining my nonfiction and sort of like the more trade, I guess, books. I'd been talking about doing a book. There's a very famous British Museum series called The History of the World in 100 Objects. So one of our great shared passions is dogs. And so I want to do a book called History of the World in 100 Dogs, because they were the earliest domesticated animal that helped humans, and the earliest artworks we have depict dogs in the cave paintings from tens of thousands of years ago. And they're in every culture's art. There's African dog sculptures, there's Chinese scrolls with dogs, and then they just accompany humankind throughout the world. So I just thought that would be a really fun project to work
It's a
on.
marvelous idea. You could do Lancer and Victorian times.
Oh
and-
yeah, every time period. It started because there's a very, very famous medieval manuscript called the Très Riche of Jean, Duc de Berry, and there's a scene that's supposed to depict the month of January, and he's sitting in front of this roaring fire with this enormous feast, all these courtiers in colorful clothing bringing things, and there's these two little dogs running around on the table, probably picking up table scraps. And so I had always envisioned, like, what are those dogs doing? Like, how did they get on the table? And that kind of gave me the idea for this book.
So maybe she'll be back here to sign her bestseller. What do you think? I think it's a fabulous idea. Well, once again, thank you all very much for coming and for your attention. Virtual audience, thanks for joining us. Bye. For those of you who are not familiar with how this works, our website, poisonpen.com, you can go to either Facebook or YouTube, and you can watch the programs. They stay up there forever. So if you feel like you missed anything or you want to share it, you can just direct people to. And then there's an audio version, and we are 100 plays away from 300,000 audio downloads.
Wow.
I know, since we started this project in 2020. So I think that's fairly impressive. I like that. Anyway, if you'd like to get your book signed, oh, wait, I had a book to give away. How about that? I like to give away an advanced reading copy because I get so many of them, for one thing. But this is a sort of 1920s Sherlock Holmes. But honestly, they bring up Judge Dee. You remember Judge Dee from Tang Dynasty, China? That's why I go to the Metropolitan Museum, so I can look at the Tang, the Tang Dynasty pottery and all. He was a famous Chinese judge and sleuth, and an author named Robert Van Gulik, who was a Dutch diplomat, wrote a series of books ages ago, 1950s or something, about Judge Dee, who was kind of a Chinese Sherlock Holmes. So this series envisions Judge Dee, not the real one, but another Judge Dee in London in the 1920s. So it's kind of a riff on Sherlock Holmes. Anyway, Cheryl will be here on April 22nd to sign it. I'm trying to think, who's never been here before? Is there anybody who's never been to the store before? That's not going to work. Okay.
Whose birthday is closest?
Oh, that's a thought. All right. Whose birthday is in April? Anybody have an April?
Oh,
Oh,
look at
way
her.
over there. All right. I will bring this book to you in a minute. If you'd like to get a book signed by any of the authors, we set it up behind us here, so that'd be a little easier. We'll move this table out of the way. You're welcome to take photographs, get your book signed. Thank you for coming very much. Enjoy your
Thanks for
evening.
coming.